begin recording. So, good morning and namaste, everyone. This is Atul, and we are doing our first lecture in the Manasa series. Yeah, so this is Ayurveda in the mind, and the other one is yoga. That's going to be actually starting now. So this is the introductory lecture. I have some problems with the diacritics here. I'm doing this on a different computer than we usually do it, and I have not had time to sort that out. But you should hopefully be able to figure it out as we go along. So basically, our perspective in Ayurveda, perspective on the mind, this gets back to Sankhya philosophy. We are looking at, what's the definition of self in Ayurveda? Sharirendriya sattvatma samyogo dhari jivatam nityagaschanubandhascha parayayayarayuruchyate. We define life, according to Ayurveda, as the individuality and the conjunction of all of these elements: the body, the senses, the mind, the soul, or Atma, and how they work individually as well as working collectively. This is what constitutes life, or Ayu. Okay, so we start with Atma. So the Atma, or the self, is what animates the subtle body, and the functions of the mind, the intellect, and the physical body are all related to the Atma. So we want to start with the Atma. This is a very important thing because really the Atma is the self. It's the Atma is what has desires. The mind is the vehicle. There is an example that's given in one yoga text, Bhagavad Gita, which says that the self, or Atma, is like a passenger in a chariot, and the intellect is the driver. The mind is the chariot itself. So the mind is our vehicle for the desires that the Atma is expressing. The reins are the senses. The horses are the senses, and the reins are also understood to be the mind. So the intellect, along with mind, forms consciousness, and it is our consciousness that's controlling the senses, the working senses, as well as getting input from the knowledge-acquiring senses. But it all comes back to the Atma, what the self, what the I is. And Atma is also that part which has left when we say someone has died. So the Atma travels along with the subtle body of mind, intelligence, and ego. So this gets back to a little digression into Vedanta. According to Vedanta, Mummy's going to help you with that. According to Vedanta, the divine exists in both masculine and feminine form. So the feminine form of the divine is called Shakti, and the masculine form is Shaktiman. This is in a spiritual context. This is not talking about male and female gender in this mundane world. This is talking about the spiritual concept. Now, the spiritual concept actually says that the Atma is part of the feminine aspect of the divine. So, just to put this completely separately from the context of this world, because, identity politics is really a very hot button issue nowadays. There are many people who like to pretend that there are not problems related to gender, and there are also people who say that there needs to be change and there need to be, respect, especially for women and their potential to play whatever role they choose to play. But spiritually, the perspective of Vedanta is that we are actually all part of the subordinate feminine aspect of the divine. That's the Atma. So that is the spiritual perspective according to Vedanta. Now, Vedanta is not part of Ayurveda, but it is a fundamental, it's one of the 6 philosophical perspectives that forms the substrate through which we understand Ayurveda. So again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this topic, but just to help put it in perspective, this is what we're talking about. When we talk about the Atma, we're talking about a minute spark. According to Shvetashvatara Upanishad, the dimensions of the Atma are 1/10,000th of the size of the tip of a hair. So that's about the size of a large, maybe a large virus. It's really, really tiny. And it has, but it's the energy of the Atma that has our life, our sense of being alive and existence. This is all the Atma filtered through the mind. And then, of course, Prakriti and Purusha, these are the feminine sides and masculine sides of creation as they are manifested within this world. So, and of course, Brahman is the unlimited, almighty divine in the aspect of being powerful. Paramatma is the omniscient and omnipresent aspect, and Bhagavan is the personal aspect of the divine. And the Atma naturally seeks bliss. Okay, so we've taken a little digression into Vedanta. Now, this is where it begins to be very relevant. Okay, so we should have, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to pause the recording for just a second so I can get the link here. Sorry about that. Hold on. So, yes, that's a very good question. Thank you. Thank you, Sean. The Atma is the personal soul. So it's the self that animates the body. And when the soul has left the body, we say that someone has died. We say that they're not there. You know, you see a light in someone's eyes, and when they're alive, you see that light. And when someone has died, you see the light goes out of their eyes. You see that they're not animated anymore. There's something that has changed. There's no change in the weight of the body. There's no change in the chemical composition, but that spark, the has left. And this is described extensively in Upanishads and in Bhagavad Gita. Now, the Atma seeks bliss. Anandamayo-bhyasat. This is a principle from Vedanta. And this is as far as we are going to go into Vedanta in Ayurveda and the mind. But it's a very important thing, because if you think about what's the goal of our existence. Now, one of the words that's used for mind in Sanskrit is sattva. Now, I'm going to type that here. So sattva, of course, is one of the gunas, but it also means mind, because literally it is existence. It's our consciousness. It's where we live. So when something is pleasing to you, what is it pleasing to? It's pleasing to your mind. Someone else may find something very displeasing. So for example, I may like opera, and someone else may think it's horrible screeching sounds. Someone else may like heavy metal, and I may think that it's, sounds like construction noise, and I would rather block my ears. It's all individual, and the mind is influenced by the 3 gunas. That's what we're going to talk about. And this pleasure-seeking nature of the mind, anandamayo-bhyasat, this is a very central principle, because when we are seeking pleasure as we filter it through the mind, but it's really the Atma that is seeking Ananda. Ananda is not just pleasure in terms of, how I feel when I eat chocolates or something that I like to eat, or when I, get a nice massage or something else that I enjoy feeling. Ananda means an unadulterated type of pleasure that the soul relates to. And one thing that comes probably closer to ananda in this world is when we experience pleasure that comes from a very pure and unselfish love. For example, if we have children and we have love for our children, especially when they're very small, they're very helpless, they haven't started becoming insolent teenagers who talk back and shout at us and throw things and stuff. And we just feel love. We feel a kind of a blissful love of being in contact with them. And part of that is because we feel that there's a relationship, a bodily relationship, a physical relationship with them. But there's a connection with the Atma, with the soul, because the soul is there in their small body and we are feeling a connection. Okay? So people sometimes say, oh, I want to learn Ayurveda in a very clinical way, and I don't want to hear about spiritual mumbo-jumbo. This sounds religious. It's not religious. It's actually scientific according to Upanishads, according to Vedanta, and this was followed by all of the sages who taught and practiced Ayurveda, like the sage who wrote Sharirendriya Sattvatma Samyogo Dhari Jivatam. This is part of the definition of Ayurveda. It's not sectarian. It's not restricted to one particular belief system or another, or it's not Hindu or anything like that. It's simply, what is that lives within us? What is that is us, that is the actual me that is filtered through all these other things? Now, this is a central thing because we're going to talk about the filtering, and we're going to talk about how the mind is expressing the desires of the Atma. So I'm not going to go into this discussion on Shakti, Antaranga Shakti, Bahiranga Shakti, and Tatastha Shakti. That's a little bit outside the scope here. And the Prakriti and Purusha, this is where we are, we went through this in our overview on Sankhya philosophy. So the divine manifests as the Purusha within this world, who's represented as Shiva. There are three gunas. Ahankar, or ego, manifests, and then Ahankar in Sattva gun produces mind. This is a very important principle. Okay, I cannot emphasize it enough. Ahankar is the sense of identity. Ahankar is like the glue element. Okay, it's the glue that connects the spiritual existence of the Atma with the mundane sphere, with existence in worldly life. Okay, that is the glue. It's the connection, because there are really things that are, the Atma is actually not bound by anything material. That's why we sometimes feel a connection with someone, someone that we love. We may feel a connection even if they are thousands of miles away. There's no, you can't make a scientific experiment to prove this. People have tried, people have failed, people have dismissed any claims to do that. But if you think on your own experience and you have a connection with someone, you can easily think of an example where, there was something happening with someone that you were connected to, and you felt that was happening, and you didn't have any reason. There was no rational explanation. That is because of the spiritual nature of the Atma. It transcends this worldly existence. And Ahankar is the connection between the otherworldly nature of the Atma in this world. So yes, Ahankar, or ego, in Sattva gun produces mind. So the mind is balanced in Sattva gun. Sattva gun is the quality of purity, of when we are peaceful. So when we want to balance the mind, what's a good practice? Someone tell me, what's a good practice for balancing the mind? What will make the mind feel balanced and refreshed? What is a good practice? What's a good sadhana for the mind? Someone tell me. Just go ahead, put it in the chat there. What is a good sadhana for the mind? Meditation, exactly. Because what are you doing in meditation? The goal of yoga process, of Ashtanga yoga, is to create a favorable condition for meditation. And if we can get the mind in a completely pure state, then we are able to perceive the very subtle existence of the spiritual substrate. Again, this gets back to Vedanta. If we go back to Vedanta Sutra, this whole world is actually built on a transformation of spiritual existence. And instead of seeing this world as matter and dark and covered by darkness and ignorance, we can tune into the underlying spiritual reality. And that is something that is done by advanced practitioners of yoga, and they are able to achieve siddhis, or different things that seem to defy the laws of nature because of being able to connect with this underlying spiritual substrate. I'm getting very esoteric here, and I'm really digressing, but I think it helps to put this in context. Now, ahankar, or ego, in Rajogun produces intellect. Think about where intellect is balanced. What's the best thing to do for intellect? Keep it active, right? What is it that, for example, with kids, what is a good thing? Get them to solve puzzles, get them to read books, get them to use their intellect and study and learn things, and their intellect will flourish. What happens if they sit passively and they watch TV all day, or they play video games or watch YouTube videos? The intellect will tend to vegetate. Now, we talk about mind and intellect as if they're separate things. And in fact, even the concept of ego or identity, really, all of these things together constitute consciousness. But when we are trying to talk and think about how they work, we talk about them as if they're separate things, okay? So mind plus intellect plus ego is consciousness. So sometimes when we're talking about mind, we're really talking about consciousness and these principles. So, if you think about how you think for a second. You don't think about, well, my intelligence says this, but my mind says this. Well, sometimes I have those conversations when I'm having my less functional moments, and it's usually something over my intelligence is telling me I should not really do this because it won't be good for me. And my mind is saying, well, that would really feel good. I'd like to do that. But the intelligence is saying, that's not going to be good for you. It's not healthy. Don't do it. But you get the idea. These are all functions of intelligence, of consciousness. And consciousness is really what we're after here when we talk about Ayurveda and the mind. It's all about consciousness. So let's talk about now the Hankar and Tamogun. This is where we get the senses, the body, the elements, and the objects of sense perception. So this is basic Sankhya, basic review of Sankhya. This is the whole process of creation. The Purusha is a manifestation of the divine. You get the three gunas, you get Ahankar, and then you get Ahankar and Sattva gun produces mind. That's also why sattvic practice, like meditation, like doing Ashtanga yoga, is balancing for the mind. Ahankar and Rajogun produces intellect, and that's why activity is a natural thing for the intelligence. We apply intelligence, and when I say intelligence, I'm not just talking about mathematical intelligence or logical intelligence. I'm also talking about the intelligence that we apply, our creative intelligence, our musical intelligence, our kinetic, our motion intelligence. When you are dancing, you are using your kinetic intelligence. There are 8 different types of intelligence according to modern research into the use of intellect. And really that's what we're talking about when we talk about buddhi. It is that by which we are able to consider things. Now, the part of buddhi that deals with discrimination is important and significant, but discrimination is not just as simple and cut and dry as only dealing with logic. And then finally, you have ahankar and tamogun, which produces the senses, body, and elements. Okay, so now we're talking about the subtle and the physical bodies. And so we have the ego or hankar. And this is, I've made this little tiny kind of egg wrapper around the starry thingy here is the Atma. Why star? Because it's shining. Its energy is actually pervading throughout the body. According to the Upanishads, the energy of the Atma is pervading throughout the body by means of the circulation of prana, the 5 types of prana, prana, apan, vyana, saman, and udan. And the 5 secondary prana as well. And these things are allowing the energy of the Atma to pervade throughout the entire body. So the ego is the first layer. And then you have the intellect or the buddhi. And that's what I've shown kind of as this dumbbell thing. And really, it's a poor drawing, but you get the idea. It is both in the heart and in the head. And then there's mind, the mind or manas. The mind is consciousness, and it permeates the subtle and physical bodies through the vital force. So if you think about it this way, imagine that, let's say that you're sitting in a chair or you're sitting in a lotus pose. This is your physical body, right? Your physical body is something you can touch. I can whack myself on the knee. I'm going to feel something on the leg. I'm going to feel it in my hand. It's tangible. It's physical, right? But think about this. There's another you. There's this other form which is coexisting with your physical body, which is your subtle body or sukshma sharir. The sukshma sharir can also be referred to as the astral body. And you can travel in your astral body as well. You can actually separate sometimes from the physical body when the physical body is in a deep state of sleep. We often do this in our dreams, sometimes especially when people have taken certain types of intoxicants, or if they've taken hallucinogens, they will also travel in a waking state as well, which is a kind of a dreamlike state. There are also yogis who are able to travel in their sukshma sharir and sometimes go great distances and even make their sukshma sharir visible to others through tapping into that underlying substrate of spiritual energy. That's another thing. That's another topic that we don't really need to get into. But you get the idea. So think about this. Here's my body. And I also have my subtle body. And it's kind of like the second me that is residing within the physical body. When we die, because we all die sometime, right? And when that happens, the subtle body is leaving the physical body. It is breaking the connection. And it is the Atma that goes along with the subtle body. Now, the subtle body, or sukshma sharir, changes its shape. Right now, it has adapted to the form of your physical body. And sometimes you meet someone and you have a perception. Some people are more perceptive. I have a little bit of perception of this. I can meet someone and feel that I see the energy of their subtle body. And sometimes it's a very positive thing. Sometimes it's a very negative thing. Sometimes you meet someone who looks really good physically, but their subtle body is all corrupt and rotten. and evil. And sometimes you meet someone and they don't look like anyone significant or outstanding, but their subtle body is shining and there's energy coming from them, and they, appear to be someone who has a connection with, with divine energy and can do things. So it goes both ways. But when we die, when the subtle body, the sukshma sharir, leaves the physical body behind, it will change shape, because it's going to go into a phase of in-between and then adaptation to a new body. Now, sometimes someone may adapt their subtle body to an animal life, and that usually comes when their consciousness has already gone down the route of being very physical and more and less aware of the things that humans are supposed to be aware of. So the Ayurvedic perspective is that becoming an animal is really not a good thing, because consciousness, our higher consciousness, which is aware of spiritual reality, which allows us to engage in spiritual practices, because yoga really is a spiritual practice. It's not exercise, it's actually a spiritual practice process, and the asanas are just one step along, if they're just one rung on the ladder. Okay, so anyway, so this is just the perspective, and this is a bit of background. Let's move on here. So, okay, ego or ahankar, this is the first covering of the Atma. It's the glue. It's the connection between the non-material Atma to the other layers of existence. And it has the functions. It provides the sense of identity, ownership, and doingness, the sense that I am the doer of actions. By the way, we're going to take a break in about 25 minutes, just in case you were wondering. The intellect, or buddhi, this is the part that has our discrimination. It has also the functions of logic and reasoning and memory. And, as I said, buddhi also functions on many levels. It is also involved in our discrimination, is not just in terms of abstract thought, but it's in terms of all of the things that we do. It's intimately connected with mind, and it resides mostly in the head. The intellect may motivate the mind, and it may also be influenced to rationalize action according to desires. We've all been down that road where, we rationalize something. It's really driven by the mind. This is our analysis in the Ayurvedic perspective on mind. Our rationalization is the word that's used in modern psychology. And really, it is a process that takes place where the intelligence is becoming influenced by the mind. The mind is the big driver of consciousness and action. Finally, the mind, or manas, resides in the heart, and it's very intimately connected with intellect and ego. As I said before, they are really all thoroughly entangled. It's all part of consciousness. But the mind manifests the consciousness of the Atma in connection with the body and the senses. It's also the center of all sense activities. And it has occupations. It's sometimes divided into 7, sometimes divided into 3. I like to take this threefold perspective on the mind's occupations. They are thinking, feeling, and willing. And there's an example for this. So functions are thinking, feeling, and willing. The mind is the center of all sense activities. Our perceptions of what is pleasure and what is pain take place in the mind. There's a saying, one man's food is another man's poison. And this is because we perceive things differently. Someone enjoys one thing and someone else finds the same thing horrible. It's, you know, you can easily come up with examples of this. And our consciousness permeates the entire body through the circulation of vital energy or prana. So that's just a little recap. And we talked about the transmigration of the soul, how the subtle body, which is mind, intelligence, and ego, carries the soul or the Atma from one physical body to the next. When the Atma has left the body, there is no life. When the Atma is not present, the body is not going to live. Now, sometimes the astral body or the Sukshma Sharira may travel outside the physical body. This is a case, it's a kind of a special case because there's still a connection. If that connection is broken, then the physical body will die if there's no connection that's being maintained. That's why if somebody, you know, takes hallucinogens, they sometimes will lose their connection with the physical body, and then the physical body can be occupied by others because there's a plane of existence that one tunes into where there are other types of beings who do not have physical bodies who are happy to take over another physical body. Again, there's not a you know, you can't document this. People certainly have tried, and you know, people can relate anecdotal, they can relate stories about ghosts and things like that. But according to Ayurveda, it is a thing, and it can happen. And this is also something that sometimes happens when someone has apparently lost their grip on reality. They are sometimes said to have a problem with a bhut, or another entity that is either co-residing in their body or that has mostly taken over. And that usually is something that only happens if someone has just gone too far in taking you know, hallucinogens, peyote or other types of hallucinogens that sometimes weaken the normally strong connection between the subtle and gross physical bodies. But other than that, when the Atma has gone, when the subtle body has gone, then there's no life. The physical body shuts down. Atma is a catalyst for life, and it's the presence of Atma that's filtered through ego and mind, which is manifest throughout the physical body via the circulation of prana. Okay, now let's talk a little bit more about these occupations of the mind. So really we've talked so far, we've gone over the philosophical basis. Okay, so quick quiz here. We talked about a little review of Sankhya, and we said that the Purusha manifests, the first thing that comes about are the three gunas and ahankar. So what is it that comes out of ahankar in sattva gun? What's the thing that arises from ahankar in sattva gun? So go ahead and put the answer there in chat. What is it that comes out of ahankar in sattva gun? Or the mode of purity, the mode of goodness, the mode of equilibrium? What is the thing? What's the thing or the element from the perspective of Sankhya that arises from ahankar or ego in connection with sattva gun? If you are saying it, I can't hear you unless you unmute yourself, or you can just type it in the chat. What is it that ahankar and sattva gun produces? There are three things: ahankar and sattva gun, and this was something that you learned in Sankhya. Ahankar in rajagun and ahankar in tamogun. I'm only at this point interested in ahankar in sattva gun and ahankar in rajogun. So sattva, rajas, and tamas, these are the three gunas. That's, yes, those are the three gunas. But specifically, when we take the element of ahankar or ego and we mix it with sattva gun, there's one specific thing that is produced. I'll give you a hint. It's the topic of this presentation, and it's the topic of this module that we are going through. Ayurveda and the tamogun, ahankar and tamogun produces the five elements and the sharira. Yes, it's the mind. Ahankar and sattva gun produces mind. Mind has this connection with sattva gun, and this is also why things that get us in a sattvic state are naturally balancing for the mind. And ahankar in rajogun produces buddhi or intellect. Okay. All right. So let's go on back to the topic here. So what's the development of consciousness? We have activities. Activities arise from thinking, feeling, and willing. Let's talk about that. We also said that these are the three occupations or vrittis of the mind. Okay? So the Sanskrit word is vritti. And three occupations: thinking, feeling, and willing. How does that work? So think about this. Here's a simple example. I see someone eating ice cream. Maybe it's someone I see outside or in the house or on TV or something like that. Okay? And what happens when I start to think about it. I start thinking about ice cream. Vanilla ice cream, caramel, soy ice cream, or rice cream, whatever I have, I start thinking about it. What happens if we start thinking about it? Now I'm talking about this. You might not be thinking about it, especially if you are shivering on the east coast of the US or it's winter in most places. You might not be thinking about it much. You might start to feel like having ice cream. So you see, here's the first thing: thinking. I think, and then I start to feel, and then willing. Okay, well, I happen to know that I have some ice cream in the freezer. I'm going to go get up and get some. Now we have this willing. I have the will to do something about it. So these are the three occupations. Yes, now this is how these occupations of the mind, thinking, feeling, and willing, produce action, because it's a natural sequence. And then what happens when we do something? More thinking, more feeling, and more willing is produced. It is not, it's an endless cycle. And, then there are reactions to what happens. I've tried to give a very simple example. Ice cream. Now, intellect may intervene. It might say, hey, wait a minute. If you eat ice cream, it's not going to help you lose weight. Let's face it, Atul, you are already over where you should be. So let's not do this, okay? Have an apple instead. And every action has consequences. So this is really a cycle. Now, this is kind of at the core of our Ayurveda and Sankhya perspective on mind. It is all about thinking, feeling, and willing. And if we want to avoid a particular type of thing, let's say, for example, attraction between, sexual attraction. How does that work? Well, if you are attracted to someone and you feel compelled or drawn, Yeah, so vritti is related to sanskar, and sanskar can have an effect on it, and it also can produce sanskar. Usually sanskar happens with, sanskar or impressions happens with repeated occupations. So when we do things continuously and frequently and regularly, it produces impressions or sanskar. So let's talk about, for example, if you feel sexual attraction for someone, then if you put yourself in proximity to that person, well, you already know that there's a chance that something may happen, right? And especially if it's something that say, okay, well, look, I should not be in that situation. I do not want to go down that road. The only thing you can really do, the best thing you can do, is you just have to avoid, not put yourself in that situation. Because if that attraction is there, and I give this example specifically because sexual attraction is a very powerful function of the mind. It is very powerful. It is driven by there's a programming that's in the mind, in this, also the body, and the body and mind are having a connection, and there is a reproductive urge, and that draws us to characteristics in the opposite sex, if we have the heterosexual inclination, that are going to end in human reproduction. And that's just something that drives this whole vritti of thinking, feeling, willing, action, and then reaction, consequences. You feel attraction to someone, you end up doing something with them, there's a reaction with it. Maybe they already had a partner, the partner becomes jealous, there's a quarrel, there's a fight, there's conflict, or one person wants to break off a relationship with the other one, and there's a conflict, there's a fight, there's hurt feelings, there's things that are said. Now, it's said that we are responsible for our actions, but we are not responsible for our thoughts. In other words, if I am thinking things, if I'm thinking about doing something, there's not going to be a karmic reaction for just thinking something. And there's also not a karmic reaction for just saying something, unless that is going to inflict pain on others. We would be responsible for pain that we inflict on others. But really, the best thing is if we can align our thoughts and we can aim our thoughts at the things that will actually be beneficial and that will not lead to something that we regret later. Because these three occupations of the mind, thinking, feeling, and willing, it's almost like hitching yourself up to a moving train. It is very hard to get that train off the rails. It's going to go from point A to point B to point C, and depending on the strength of the urge. Now, one of the other things that we also talk about are the 6 vegas, or urges. So vega means an urge. We have urge to speak, urge to taste things. We have sexual urges. We have the urge to become angry. There are urges which are repressible and urges which are not repressible. And, this is also part of the functioning of the mind and how the mind is influenced by the gunas. Sexual urges are more related to rajogun, to the mode of passion. So when we're active, those come into play more. And it's, passion, we also say rajogun is the mode of passion. It's the mode of desiring, of wanting, of, taking action. And that, of course, is a very large part of what leads to procreation. So I'm just trying to, get you started thinking about how these 3 vrittis, these 3 core vrittis of thinking, feeling, and willing, how they are driving so much of our human behavior. It is the mind, and it is also the mind residing within our body. Now, there's another interesting digression here. Think about this, for example. Now, I've been talking about sexual attraction and reproductive urges, assuming it's basically from the heterosexual viewpoint. It's driven by reproductive biology, right? But sometimes people are in a particular physical body which doesn't really match their inclination. Sometimes this may come from a previous life. They just have not really adapted, or they don't really identify. So, our perspective in Ayurveda is that we say, yeah, okay, we want to respect that. We want to respect your consciousness. What your feeling is, where you are, is not dictated by your body. Your intelligence is also not dictated by your body, by your gender, or anything else. Your ability to contribute and to do things, it's really more about your consciousness than anything external. So no one should ever be able to put someone in a box because of the external things, because of the physical things, because it's all about consciousness. So yeah, it's a very interesting point that Sean raised, about the suppressible urges and sanskars. So for example, I have met people who have, from their previous life, they have sanskars that they just do not have a lot of passion. They're naturally very sattvic people, and they're not driven by passion. I've also known people who are just, they are always getting carried away by urges, and it's very, very hard for them to, to deal with their urges. It has a lot to do with it, and that is why there's one very important conversation in Bhagavad Gita where Krishna and Arjuna are having a discussion about the mind. Now, Bhagavad Gita, of course, is a very important text on yoga. And Arjuna, when Krishna is talking about mind, because really the goal of yoga practice is to be able to channel the mind in an upward direction, away from getting more involved with matter and toward having a spiritual connection. And Arjuna tells Krishna, he said, "Oh, Krishna, you are talking about the mind. It is so powerful and so difficult to control. It seems that it is almost as difficult as controlling the wind." And Krishna gives a very interesting answer to Arjuna. He says, "Asamshayam mahabaho mano dunnigraham chalam abhyasena tu kaunteya vairagena cha grihyate." O mighty armed son of Kunti, it is undoubtedly most difficult to control the mind, but it is possible by constant practice and by detachment. What do we mean by detachment? Now, detachment in the word book of modern psychology is a bit negative. It means that someone's not really feeling connected to reality. It's almost like a precursor to psychosis. When we are talking about vairagya, it means we are distancing ourselves from our attachments and desires, and we are understanding, hey, look, I am feeling so much attraction for this, eating this thing or being with this person, but is that really going to make me happy? Happiness is something that comes from within, and when I have anand, that will be connected to the Atma, not to putting more things through my physical senses. And by practice, if we practice living simply, if we practice focusing our consciousness and doing consciousness-raising activities, it becomes easier to focus the mind. The mind, also, another thing that Krishna says in the Gita, the mind can be our best friend or it can be our worst enemy. If we have learned to focus the mind, to use the mind like a big mirror that can focus the sun, we can do amazing things. We can accomplish anything if we are able to focus consciousness. But if the mind pulls us here and there, and we indulge in things which are which destroy our self-discipline, then we gain less control, and the mind can drag us down into degradation. This is, again, we're talking more about yoga philosophy than about Ayurveda, but this also applies when we are talking to people. We want to understand their state of consciousness. We want to understand their ability to follow discipline. Sometimes we are trying to get someone, for example, just to take up a more plant-based diet. For some people, this is inconceivable. Some people, when you tell them, look, you've got to stop having red meat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You've got to have more veggies. They say, oh my God, I can't even imagine. How could I can't even think of doing that. And when someone is that strongly convinced, usually the thing that is unconvincing them that that's the only way for things to be is they have gotten some big health issue, and that may be why they're talking to you as an Ayurvedic practitioner. And then we have to be able to talk to them with compassion and just help them to find a ramp that they can follow that will help them. First of all right, don't go out with your buddies drinking and going to steakhouses. Try to go to more healthy places to eat where you have some healthy eating options. Try to do some cooking at home where you can smell the things and smell nice things that you're cooking. And the other thing is that association is important as well in yoga practice. Being with other people who practice yoga is going to help us more than if we're, going with other people to discos. Again, using the example of yoga practice, because yoga is all about the mind. So a lot of what we're talking about in Ayurveda and the mind is really what is already there in yoga texts. So I would like to take a break here before we resume. I've already taken a good amount of time here. We have another hour to go, so we're going to take about a 5-minute break, and then we will resume. We have now resumed recording. Okay, well, I spent a little bit more time than I intended on some of those previous slides. There's a bit more material to cover. We have another end in about 15 minutes, and I also want to give some time for questions. So, of course, put your questions in the chat anytime. So let's talk about the effects of action. So, we talked about thinking, feeling, and willing, how they are kind of like a little locomotive that pulls along the train of our actions. What we say affects our consciousness. Speaking is not considered action, but it has an effect on our consciousness. It also has an effect on the consciousness of others. Think about the speech of somebody like Adolf Hitler, or the speech of someone like Mahatma Gandhi, and the effect that had on large numbers of people, either to induce hatred or to induce peaceful resistance. Or Martin Luther King. Many examples that you can give both on the positive and on the negative side. What we do affects our consciousness. So this is now, we're really talking about the feedback loop. What we say changes our consciousness. It affects our consciousness. What we do affects our consciousness, also what we experience. And the word that we use for this is sanskars. And I'm sorry, the diacritics are messed up here. Sanskars usually spelled like this. And these are sanskars, or impressions. There are also things that you see them and you can't unsee them, especially very negative or disturbing images. Everyone has experienced things like that, things that stay with you that you'd like to forget, but you can't. And there may also be positive impressions that can stay with us and that can have an effect on us. I may remember things that I did when I lived in an ashram, and I would get up very early every morning, and I would do certain chants and things, and I still remember those. Those are still with me. Those are positive impressions or sanskars. So it's very important to consider, when we talk about action, there is definitely an effect on consciousness, and that effect can stay with us as well. And there is the conscious mind and also the subconscious mind. We have impressions from previous lives. These are stored in our subconscious. We often don't have a specific memory of our previous lives, but we have impressions. We start out this life with a new set of memories, but we still have our old impressions and conditioning. That's why we may sometimes not be able to put our finger on something. We may not be able to say a specific, oh yeah, I got burned when I was 3 years old, and that's why I've been afraid to put my hand near the stove since then. There may be things that happened in a previous life. Let's say, I was bitten by a wild animal, and that gives me a fear of dogs, for example. Or I, fell down a cliff in a previous life, and that was an injury that resulted in my death, and that gives me a fear of heights. But I don't know the part of it that was, buried in my previous life. I just have an impression. I have a feeling that it makes me not feel good. And when someone tries to tell us, oh, that's silly, why do you feel that way? My response is always, well, so you don't know, you're not me. How do you know? And what gives you the right to judge me for feeling that way? That's just how I feel. But that's what sensible people do. They respect others. Okay, that's how you feel. I'm sorry. We won't do that. So our impressions from past lives may affect us as irrational fears. They may also give us a very strong attraction to a particular path in life. Let's say, for example, that I was an artist and I was a painter and I was able to create really beautiful paintings. Maybe from the time I'm a child, I show a talent for doing art. And I just, for some reason, feel very attracted to doing it. And, that may be coming from a previous life. There are many different things that can happen that could be impressions from previous lives. This is the perspective of, that we follow in Ayurveda. We accept that this is a thing, that the subconscious mind has impressions from previous lives. And it's just something that we can deal with. Now, sometimes, for example, someone from their previous life already had an inclination to follow a particular lifestyle. Okay. In my case, I was definitely had a connection with yoga philosophy and spiritual practices, which are common in India in my previous life. And when I was born in the West and I grew up in a context where I just didn't really feel that I fit in. So it was a very natural thing for me to gravitate toward yoga practice and following the path of bhakti yoga and living in an ashram. That felt very natural to me. It was a very strong inclination. And at the same time, there's also parts of me that are very, very Western in my approach. So I tend to take a very integrative approach. That's just me personally. We all have different things that may be driving us. And if you think on those, think about the things that are in your subconscious mind. Okay? So let's do a little group exercise here. And you don't have to share this. You don't have to, unless you want to, you don't have to share it with the rest of us. Think about something that's in your subconscious mind and that you don't really know how it got there, but it's just there, okay? And think about how that might be connected with a previous life or previous experience. And you don't even have to say it. You don't have to put it. You can share it if you want. But just take a minute to think about that, okay? Think about something that for you yourself, or more than one thing, that just, you don't really know how it got there, how it's part of your subconscious, but you know it's there, and it finds a way of making itself known to you, okay? So go ahead. Try to think of something like that, at least one thing. And you can share it or not share it. Now, take that thing and think about how it has affected choices that you've made in your life. For example, maybe I was going into college. What did I choose as my college major? Was that influence? Maybe I got involved in a relationship with someone as a result of that thing. Maybe I made bad choices as a result of something that was there, of some irrational fear. Maybe I came to terms with it. These are all things that can happen with us. When we also look at things from the perspective of Jyotish, Jyotish also gives us an indication of sometimes the things that may be going on from previous lives. We also sometimes have things that are there in our subconscious that are partially learned lessons that we have to finish learning. Before we can move on. And sometimes we just make bad choices, and when we make bad choices, then our consciousness will sometimes pull us down. So there's a good example. And again, that's sometimes the fear is there. It can happen, sometimes as a result of things that happen in this life. And if it hasn't happened in this life, it may have been something that happened in a previous life. There may have been a serious injury or something that occurred. And again, I think that whenever someone has a particular talent, if one started out being able to, do something like swimming or playing a musical instrument or singing or other things, and they took to it naturally from an early age, it is usually an indication that they may have had some exposure to that in their previous life. That is my feeling. So, okay, that's interesting. Thank you for sharing that. So let us move on. Now, conditioning. Conditioning is another aspect of what happens with the mind. So we learn behavior in this life, and it can condition the mind, and we can have imposed conditioning. Now think about what happens in the military. What happens in the military? People have to go to boot camp. What is the thing that the drill instructor in boot camp is really trying to get the recruits to do? The number one thing. Does anybody have an idea? Can you tell me what you think? And there's no right answer or wrong answer. What do you think is the number one thing that the drill instructor, and you can think back, maybe you went through this yourself, maybe you've just seen it in movies, you must have an opinion about it. What do you think is the number one thing that they really want the recruits to do? Just go ahead and put your answer in the chat there. And then I'll tell you what I think. Okay. Well, let me tell you what I think. I think that the number one thing they're usually after is there's physical conditioning is one thing, but mentally, and of course we're talking about the mind, mentally the goal is to get the recruits to follow orders without thinking. Don't even think about it, just do it. Do it right now. And even if it's arbitrary, you're not allowed to argue. You're not allowed to question it. You just have to follow the orders and don't think about it. You don't filter it. You don't decide whether it's a good order or a bad order. You have to do it right now. No argument. And that is a type of conditioning. So that, and the reason for that, and there's an actual reason for it, because if soldiers go into a life or death battle situation where following orders depends on living or dying or the success or failure of a mission, then it's very important that they're able to do that and do everything quickly. The other aspect is that that's a type of conditioning which sometimes can overcome. People will sometimes have an idea about, for example, I feel like I have to have 30 minutes to bathe in the morning, or I feel like I don't have to bathe in the morning. If you are made to, if you have to do it, you can find a way to do the whole thing in 5 minutes. It's just a matter of how much motivation you have. And sometimes the motivation is someone yelling at you. Sometimes the motivation is you just need to do it. But once you learn a behavior and it becomes conditioned, it becomes a part of you. It becomes something that it's much easier to hold on to. Once you've broken the barrier, and sometimes the barrier is simply what we think we can do. So actions also, well, absolutely. I mean, this is part of discipline. Yoga is a process of discipline. Yoga is all about practice and discipline. Yoga practice means I dedicate myself to, maybe, 15 minutes, half an hour, even longer every day. And I'm doing my practice every day. I'm dedicated to it. That is called sadhana. Sadhana means when we are doing a practice and developing a discipline. That is called sadhana. So our actions usually do condition us in some way, especially if they're actions that we do regularly, we do them with intention. And the example is yoga class. We are making a choice, but it is conditioning us mentally, physically. It's helping with the circulation of prana, and it may help clear things that could muddy the waters of consciousness. Another very important aspect of the mind is that the mind adapts. The mind sometimes adapts very slowly, but it is continuously adapting. So, for example, I always find it interesting to hear about, I don't like to judge people for what they believe and, what their political beliefs are or whatever their beliefs are. But it's always interesting to see why people believe the way they do and why people sometimes change their perspective. Because this is also a function of the mind. So you can think about your own self and how you may have changed your perspective on something. For example, when I was younger, I used to think that, everything is about karma and what we do. And so if people have gotten themselves in a bad situation and then they want help, maybe they're just lazy people. Now my perspective is, well, this can happen. It can happen easily. It can happen to me. It has happened to me. And I actually appreciate having a chance to not end up being a homeless person, which is a very easy thing in today's America. Because there's a little bit of leeway, and I'm not one paycheck away from being homeless. That's the sad reality today, at least in America, for many people. So, that's an example of something where I've changed my perspective. I didn't change my perspective overnight. It was an adaptation. I gradually got more information, I found more things about my environment, and I went through life experiences that gradually changed my perspective until I was seeing something from a completely different light. Okay? Now, we can all think of an example of that. You can think of an example of how you've changed your perspective. Sometimes we go through a revelation where there's been a weight of things that we've accumulated and it sort of breaks the dam. But sometimes it's something where we gradually undergo a shift. We undergo a little bit at a time of a shift, and then suddenly one day we wake up and say, hey, oh, I'm actually looking at this from the other side now. The final point here is conditioning. Conditioning can be very hard to break. If someone has been conditioned to do things a certain way, it can be very hard to break that conditioning. So if someone is conditioned to, for example, conditioning, again, as Ayurvedic practitioners, we sometimes want to try to get people to adopt a more plant-based diet. Plant-based diets have been shown scientifically to be so much more healthy and to have so much advantage in terms of avoiding serious long-term illnesses. And from the Ayurvedic perspective, it is so much easier to digest. But the conditioning, and especially if people have been conditioned from childhood, you have to have red meat, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's very hard to change that. The longer someone has been doing something a certain way, the more they're conditioned to do it. And unless they've been forced to do it and they're just waiting for the chance to not do it, it's going to be hard to change that path. So it's just something that we have to respect, and we have to realize that the time to break or change a negative conditioning may be somewhat proportional to the amount of time that was spent getting into that. And sometimes the driver comes because people have become seriously ill and they are just looking for something that is going to help. And then it's easier once you can convince someone, once you can change someone's mind, then the rest of them can follow. You got to get that train of thinking, feeling, and willing started. And then that pulls along all the other train cars of our life and our actions and everything. So another aspect of mind, the mind is a sponge. Okay, what do we mean by mind as a sponge? Put a sponge in ink, what's going to happen? It's going to soak up ink. If you put a sponge in dirty water, it's going to absorb the dirt. Now sponges have a lot of pores, they have a lot of holes, they can absorb a lot of things. If you want to clean a sponge, it takes a little bit of work. You put it in clean water and you have to wash it and rinse it. That is really something that the mind does. The mind will pick up emotions of others. It will pick up emotions of situations. It will save our own emotions, how we feel about something. For example, if I'm working at a job and I really don't like the job and I don't like the people I work with, I am infecting my own mind with I don't like, I hate. And it's going to be hard for us to get that out. That's why it's also good when we are in a situation that we have to deal with that we don't like, just to find a way to detach ourselves and not get so absorbed in, oh, I hate this so much, I hate this so much. Because when we think that way, we are actually creating our own bad consciousness, and we will suffer for it. Even if it's other people who are treating us badly, we can be in a situation like that and find a way to detach. But it's the nature of the mind. The mind wants to absorb things. We also can radiate emotions. This is a very tangible thing. If you're with someone who's happy, you feel happy. If you're with someone who's sad, it can be such a bring down. If they're sad and complaining, oh, I feel so miserable. That doesn't make you feel happy, does it? But, if someone is exuberant and full of joy and they just are bursting with happiness, we will feel happy being with them, even if We don't necessarily have much in common. We might not even speak the same language, but we will feel happy. We all radiate emotions. So basically, the mind, this is a very important point. The mind is a type of subtle entity. It is not just some chemical process in the brain. This is a very important point. It is a subtle entity. It has subtlety to it. And it is, there are parts of it that we can observe and we can see its effect, but there's also parts of it that are just a little mysterious. What is the actual function of consciousness? But we can understand the mind through analytical processes. And that is, in fact, what psychology does as well. It will, use analytical processes to see what's the effect of the things that are in our mind. Yeah, absolutely. Well, children are amazing because they have not really learned how to be deceptive and manipulative and how to hide their feelings. It just all comes right out. And the whole thinking, feeling, and willing thing, this is also very significant with small children. You see what happens when they have developed a will to have something. I see the truck, I want the truck, I'm going to lie here and throw myself on the floor and scream until I get the truck. Every parent of a toddler has probably gone through that. All right, so I really have to move on. Mind is a radiator of emotion. We feel the presence of others. We sense others' consciousness. And sometimes we can be with people who are spiritually developed and we feel some sense of enlightenment. We feel something from them that makes us feel more attuned. We also might be with people who have very negative energy. We might feel, I got such a bad vibe from that person. If we ourselves become more sattvic and more spiritually attuned, it is easier for us to pick up on the energy of others. If someone is doing bad actions, bad thoughts, and bad speech, this leads to bad consciousness. Yes, I swear. Sometimes it's a good outlet for frustration. But if someone is, constantly speaking, using terms of abuse, speaking badly about others, this is going to lead to bad consciousness. There's no doubt about it. And having a very large accumulation of negativity spills out in the environment. If you are in a big city and there are a lot of people with a bad consciousness, being very selfish and aggressive and angry, that creates a kind of an atmosphere or miasma that we can feel. It is tangible. What are some of the processes that we can follow for cleansing the mind? So we can cleanse the body, bathing, having a good diet, doing herbs, panchakarma. Mind cleansing processes, doing meditation, yoga, which is a process for enabling meditation, making healthy choices in our sensory input, making healthy choices in our surroundings, and also making healthy choices in the people we associate with. Sometimes we like people or we love people, but they are not really good for us. Sometimes people are not good for us because they are addicted to bad habits. And if we are with people who are constantly making bad choices, that is going to have a negative effect on us. And sometimes we have to make healthy choices in who our friends are, honestly. It sounds a bit harsh to say that, but this is a fact. Choosing our friends and especially choosing our partners, people we'll spend a lot of time with, either working or in a relationship, is extremely important. And it can drag us down so much. Putting ourselves in a pristine natural setting has a natural cleansing effect on the mind. Going out, taking a hike, taking a walk, you know, it can be such a cleansing thing just to get out in nature, get away from traffic lights and streets and paved roads and and cars. This can have a cleansing effect. We can do meditation, but if we make a connection between the Atma and the unlimited divine, this actually has more of a cleansing effect. Otherwise, it's kind of like, I'm going to go stand in the shower but not turn on the water. We need to actually try to make an active connection. This is the spiritual aspect of yoga. And there are different yoga paths that take different approaches with the different aspects of the divine. So these are some of the processes that we can do for cleansing the mind. And yoga is a process which enables meditation. It's very difficult to achieve a steady mind. Why? Because the mind is always in motion. Let's do a little exercise. Stop thinking. No, stop thinking. Make your mind a blank. Okay, what's going through your mind right now? Why is he telling me to not think about anything? I can think about whatever I want. Okay, it's really hard to try to stop thinking, to try to stop your mind. It's very difficult. The mind is the center of our thinking, feeling, willing, and sense perception. It is always in motion. It's always busy. It's always seeking sensory inputs. It's always processing sensory inputs. And everything we do creates further activity in the mind. It creates more thinking, feeling, and willing. Stopping the mind and focusing is extremely difficult. That's why usually you have to find a higher thing to fix the mind on. For example, one way of dealing with depression from the perspective of yoga is, rather than to take drugs, to try to find a way to elevate yourself, to get out of tamogun. So in depression, classical depression, there is more of an association of the mind with tamogun. So moving to rajagun, doing an activity, take up an activity, go on a walk, do a hobby, do a craft, do something to try to get more into rajagun, and then gradually move the mind up more towards sattvagun. Always we can find a way to move up, and it takes a little bit of effort, and it also helps to have the right type of support. We sometimes need help. Another point here, and I think we are just about, we're just about done here. And then there's one more presentation that I wanted to try to get through, because I really have used way too much time talking about some of these things here. So prana conveys consciousness. There can be an external flow. People who do Tai Chi and also yogis can do physically impossible things through the ability to direct prana. There is a type of energy that we are able to focus. We can also direct the same energy inwardly. We can regulate the circulation of prana and calm the mind. That is what we do in Ashtanga Yoga. Asanas in yoga are meant to help calm and balance the circulation of prana, and having the prana balanced helps to balance the mind. So the way you sit, if you sit in an asana and you breathe, or even your mom might have told you, well, count to 10, take a deep breath and count to 10. And if you focus on your breath, that's a way of getting over being angry about something, where we might react or say something that could lead to further problems. So these are all things that we can do, even simple breathing exercises that can sometimes help us. Food is also an element in consciousness. The mind is a sponge and the mind is a radiator, right? We said this before. Consciousness is involved in cooking, and the transfer of consciousness does not require physical contact. So think about it. If my mind, the sponge of my mind, is soaked with dirty things and angry things, and I'm cooking, where is that mental energy going? It is actually going to go in the food that I'm cooking. So if we eat food prepared by an angry person, it can make us sick. Conversely, if food is cooked with love, if the person who's cooking it has prepared it with love and loving intention, it's going to taste better. And food can also be done with a meditative mood. I learned to cook. This is how I learned to cook. I learned to cook in an ashram, and everything had to be done as an act of love and devotion and in a meditative mood, and not speaking, but just thinking very deeply on, sublime and meditative thoughts, and to put just an outpouring of loving intention into preparing the food. And this makes a huge difference. So you see where we're coming with all this. We're talking about the mind. We're talking about all these principles of yoga and philosophy. And this is where we end up. Because food is such a very important part. Diet is such an important part of what we're doing in Ayurveda. And we really, it really starts with how it's prepared. So getting things that are prepared indifferently or outside, it's never going to be the same. Many of our problems begin from digestion, and poor digestion leads to malabsorption. Malabsorption can lead to buildup of ama or toxins. Addictive eating habits can also lead to imbalance. Our consciousness can dictate what we think we need, but this is often just conditioning. And changes in diet often require a change in consciousness. I've given many examples here about, as an Ayurvedic practitioner, you're dealing with clients and you have this kind of mental block or conditioning obstacle to overcome. Because we often need to get people to change their diet. And this can be incredibly difficult. And this is, I think, the number one thing that we usually apply the knowledge of Ayurveda in the mind. It's not just in ourselves. For ourselves, we can just say, well, look, I'm going to do yoga practice and I'm going to try to apply the principles. And if you follow the principles of yoga practice, this is naturally going to be very beneficial for the mind. But for other people, it's good to understand the mechanics of how these things work when we're trying to get people to make a change and trying to convince them of the need for change. 5 layers of awareness. This is actually another presentation that we do go through. This is the Panchakosh. They are usually mixed and interacting. We can understand them through life. Think about babies. They are on Annamaya level. Everything wants to go in the mouth. And then when they're a little older, they want to play all the time. Hey, come on, stop playing. Time to eat. No, I don't have time. I don't want to stop. Older children, adolescents, it's all music, drama, it's books, TV, video games. This is more manomaya, more mental plane. And then as a young adult, we may go in studies in university, Vijnanamaya. We may actually begin to enjoy the level of knowledge. And then finally, there is Anandamaya. Anandamaya is the level of bliss, of seeking out some type of spiritual bliss. Okay, that's it. I am really apologize for running over. We still have at least one more presentation to try to get through. So I'm going to try to go through that one more quickly. Any questions, please put them in the chat. I am, in the meantime, going to bring up the other presentation here. Okay, so we're going to talk about the nadis and chakras. And this is also a very important topic that is related to Ayurveda and the mind. So we've covered the overview, we've covered the introduction on mind, and it's fairly comprehensive. It's a lot to take in. This one is not so long, and but it has some very important connections with Ayurveda and with Ayurvedic treatment. So without further ado, let us get started. So what does nadi mean? Nadi can be translated as a vibration, a river, or an energetic channel. Nadis are the rivers through which prana moves through the body, like a highway system. Some texts say there are 72,000 nadis in the body. These are not physical. They are highways or pathways through which prana is circulated within the body, mind, and the 5 koshas. Now, you remember the 5 koshas, we went through a very brief overview at the end of the Manasa introduction. These are the 5 layers of existence: Annamaya, or the bodily consumption awareness; Pranamaya, or the awareness of vitality; Manomaya, the awareness of the mental plane and emotions and desires; Vijnanamaya, the awareness of knowledge and science; and Anandamaya, the existence of bliss. This is nadis and chakras. So there are 3 prominent nadis. The meeting places of these 3 prominent nadis are called chakras. So this is what we're going to talk about mainly. Now, the left side of the body is associated with feminine energy. The right side is associated with male energy, masculine energy. We all have both masculine and feminine energies in varying proportion. This is part of the, you can say, it is not actually directly related to gender. We're talking about masculine and feminine principles as we talk about Shakti, Shaktiman, as we talk about Prakriti and Purush. We are talking about the left side and the right side of the body. It has nothing to do necessarily of being a man or being a woman. Although with women, some women have more of a predominance of aggressive male energy, and sometimes you meet men who have a predominance of more passive and more feminine energy. But everyone within their body has both left side, right side, and masculine as well as feminine energy. It's just the proportions that vary. So the first one of these nadis is called Sushumna. So the Sushumna nadi follows the line of the spinal cord. It goes up from the root chakra at the base of the spine, Muladhara, to the crown chakra at the top of the head. So this is going up in a straight line. And of course, this is also a very significant topic in Kundalini. Pingala nadi. Pingala nadi begins from the root chakra or Muladhara. It travels in a winding pathway like a serpent. It's associated with the right side of the body and masculine energy. And breathing exercises connected with Pingala nadi use the right nostril. That's why if you're doing breathing exercises, if you're doing some pranayama that involves alternating breathing between left nostril and right nostril, that's because there's activation of these particular nadis. So right nostril is for Pingala nadi, left nostril is for Ida nadi, which we'll talk about next. Ida nadi begins from the root chakra or the Muladhara, just like Pingala and Sushumna. And it also travels in a winding path like a serpent. it's associated with the left side of the body and feminine energy. And breathing exercises for Ida Nadi use the left nostril. And you see how this looks a little bit like the caduceus, where they have the staff, the ancient Greek symbolism of the staff with two serpents entwined around it. The rod of Asclepius is the one that has just one serpent, but it's the caduceus that has two. So there's a very strong similarity there. So what are the chakras? Where we have these intersections of the Sushumna, Pingala, and Ida nadis, these are the chakras. They are major centers for the flow of energies throughout the body, and they are described extensively in yoga literature. So what are the chakras, and what's the meaning? So the Sahasrara, or the crown chakra, is at the top of the head, the place of meeting of the three bony plates. The Agya is the third eye that is just between and above the eyebrows. Vishuddha is the throat chakra. Anahata is the heart chakra. The Manipura is the navel chakra. Swadhisthana is the chakra which is just in the area of our reproductive organs. And Muladhara is the root chakra at the base of the spine. Whoop. So how are the chakras associated with the Panchamahabhuta? The earth is associated with the Muladhara, the root chakra. This is where we are grounded. Water is associated with Swadhisthana, the chakra that is associated with our reproductive organs. Fire is associated with Manipura, the navel chakra. You can probably think of breathing exercises that are meant to increase fire that are associated with the breathing down to the navel. Air is associated with Anahata, the heart chakra. Space is associated with the Vishuddha, the throat chakra, as well as with Agya and Sahasrara. How are the chakras associated with prana? So the chakras, these are nexi for circulation of energies in the body. The circulation of prana is the main mechanism by which consciousness permeates the body. And these nadis or channels are in touch with all 5 major and 5 secondary pranas. So the nadis are actually a channel for circulation of energy throughout the body. And they are also in touch with all the chakras, are the places of intersection of these 3 main channels and all 5 primary and 5 secondary pranas. So, interesting question. Yes, the left side is connected to feminine energy, both in men and in women. And also there are sometimes things, for example, some rituals that involve an invocation of feminine energy will use the left side of the body. There are some things that are done differently for men or for women, because in women, sometimes the left side of the body will have more of a connection with a particular type of energy, and sometimes for men, the right side of the body will have a better connection. So there are some things that are done differently, but these assignments of left side and right side are the same for both men and women. So so a little bit more on these chakras. The Muladhara is at the base of the spine. It's also called the sacrococcygeal plexus. Swadhisthana is behind the pubic bone, the lumbar plexus. The Manipura is at your navel center, just below the solar plexus. Anahata is at the level of the heart, the cardiac plexus. Vishuddha is the pit of the throat or the cervical plexus. Agya is between the eyebrows, and the Sahasrara or Brahmarandha is the crown of the head, or Adipati Marma. Now, there are 3 marmas which are extremely important in Ayurveda. Adipati Marma is at the top of the head. And the Anahata chakra, this marma, this is called a mahamarma. So there are three mahamarmas: this adipati marma, this marma of the heart, and marma of the navel. By blows in these particular marmas, it can actually kill someone. And this is also done in some Asian martial arts. There are some types of, in Tai Chi and others, there is also a very similar practice to marma of looking at the meridians, and there are sensitive points, and there are some of the esoteric Chinese martial arts that claim to be able to disable someone simply by exactly the right type of blow in exactly the right type of place. And in Ayurveda also, we say that in these mahamarmas, having being hit can actually cause someone to die. And there are also symbols that are sometimes used for these chakras, as shown here. So the connection with the space element. The Sahasrara element, the Sahasrara chakra, is the topmost chakra on the head. It is the location of Pran, also the location of the Mahamarma Adipati. It affects the pineal gland, and it's the highest level of consciousness state. So raising our consciousness up to this topmost chakra means that we are leaving we are on the verge of leaving the mundane realm of consciousness. Agya is the third eye. It is the home of intuition. It is associated with the pituitary gland and the lower brain. Vishuddha chakra is the throat. It's the center of communication, and it is cervical and associated with the thyroid gland. So these all three are associated with space element and with connection. Are the images there now? Okay, let's try that again. So is everyone, nobody is seeing any image or any slide? Let's try resharing that again. Okay, do you see nothing still? Okay, now we can see it. And this is the previous one that we were looking at with the space element and these three chakras. So air element. So air element has the Hridaya Marma, which is also Mahamarma. And this is related to the thymus, the heart, and the lungs. So it's associated with the chest cavity and the rib cage area. So Hridaya Marma is also Mahamarma. It is extremely important. It can be used in treatment, and as well if it is a very powerful blow, it is actually used. Sometimes it can actually kill someone or disable them. So the science of marma and understanding marma is extremely critical, and of course we don't do such things of trying to cause harm, but we are instead trying to find ways to activate very gently. Now, Manipura chakra is just above the navel. This is associated with the fire element. The marma is called Nabhi marma. It relates to digestive organs, the pancreas, stomach, liver, gallbladder, and small intestine. And it is the seat of Agni. It is the seat of fire element within the body. Well, We did air, we did fire, and water. So Swadhisthana chakra is the sacral, and this is below the navel. It is the seat of mala and relates to waste. It's also the seat of reproductive organs and pleasure, and also the seat of ojas. Finally, the earth element. The earth element is associated with the Muladhara chakra. And here is an interesting illustration. The marma it is associated with the Nabhi marma. It relates to the prostate, the kidneys, the bladder, and spine. It's the seat of earth, our grounding energy, and our stability. And in some traditions, the Muladhara chakra is said to be the meeting place of the three main nadis and is also known as Triveni. Triveni means the meeting place of three rivers or nadis. This is an interesting illustration. Someone has tried to color code and show the connection of the finger channels with the different elements. So without going into detail on that, but it is an interesting illustration of the earth element connected. No, actually, when we do marma, we use marma for nadi pariksha. So nadi pariksha, that is actually Monica Manjulali's specialty. One of the things that she teaches. You are using three fingers and you are touching the wrist of someone. You are examining the kapha, pitta, and vata in that person using the energetic flow of nadis, which are present in fingertips. Now here, this is showing the index finger related to air and the middle finger related to fire or pitta, and it doesn't really add up here because then it's showing. But you're using three fingers for kapha, pitta, vata, and you are tuning into the energetic state of the nadis in the body. It is not an easy thing to do, and it is not a physical pulse taking. Although we can feel the pulse, we are actually trying to feel the energetic flow, and we are trying to tune into the state of the energetic channels in the body. So it's not something that you could do with a physical device. You actually have to use your fingers. You have to use your three specific fingers. And it's not exactly like it's shown here in this picture, but it's something like that. But that's another very complex topic, and I'm not the best one to talk about. So in conclusion, and we have really gone over our time here, but a chakra means a wheel. It is a psychic, spherical, energetic center. And the chakras are connected through channels called nadis. The chakras are 7 in number, and they are meeting points of Sushumna, Pingala, and Ida Nadi. The chakras exist both in the physical plane, in the Sthula Sharir, and the spiritual body, the Sukshma Sharir, the astral body. So do you remember we talked about this connection between the astral body, or the Sukshma Sharir, and the physical body, or Sthula Sharir? And if that connection is broken, if it's disrupted, the physical body can die, and we can actually end up being trapped in our Sukshma Sharir without having a physical body. That's not a good state to be in. That's also why experimenting with certain types of hallucinogens like peyote and so forth has gotten some people in serious trouble from It's actually has led some people to go mad, become insane because of breaking this connection between the physical body and the sukshma sharir. And anyway, this is why the chakras affect us. They affect us physically, mentally, and spiritually, and they also connect these three planes of existence. So this is a very important topic. It is connected to yoga practice. It's connected to Ayurveda. It's connected to one of the very difficult techniques of diagnosis in Ayurveda is nadi pariksha. Nadi pariksha is something that requires that you are very sensitive and very able to attune yourself to, through the touch of your three fingertips, to attune yourself to the flow of vata, pitta, and kapha in the person you're diagnosing. And it is using the basic principle that is outlined here. So this is a very important topic in Ayurveda. It's not an easy one. It is not entirely straightforward. But if you think about it in this way, if you think about this model of these three flows of energy and how they intersect at the chakras, I think this will help begin to make sense of it. So, post-diagnosis, interesting question. What happens when we die? Well, we have a strong connection. Think of these chakras. They are like points where we are kind of, we kind of have the sukshma sharir and the stula sharir sort of nailed together. And now we're kind of ripping those nails out. And the sukshma sharir is now flying free. And the physical body is going to die. So the sukshma sharir is able to undergo transformation because the sukshma sharir is really a manifestation of consciousness. It is subtle. It is not tangible, and it can change. It can transform itself. It may already have transformed itself, and the physical body just had to be removed from the picture so that it could complete its transformation and then move on to a more appropriate. And sometimes the physical bodies may be ones like those of an angel. One may have one may have the body of an angel or a deva, where the body is sattvic in nature and has a much longer lifespan and is naturally imbued with power, or it may be the body of a very negative being as well. So these are all things that can happen. So as mentioned before, nadi pariksha involves sensing the state of these three channels, sushumna, ida, and pingala. Even though we've shown here these three channels winding along, they are also present in the fingertips and in the wrist. Remember, 72,000 channels. So this is a very simplified map. There are other maps in some Ayurvedic texts that have more nadis shown. And of course, these three primary nadis also go many other places in the body, including in the fingertips. We already talked about chakras and Panchamahabhut and nadi pariksha, and that's it. So, thank you very much. Do you have any other questions? I think we're all ready to move on to other things today. I hope you found this very interesting. Okay, but that's okay. We've had this recorded, so you will be able to play this back. All right, so I am happy you enjoyed it, and so we'll follow up on the forum, and I will have an assignment. We're going to continue. I think next week is going to be herbs for manasa, and that is going to be handled by Priyanka. And then after that, I'm going to continue the Manasa series. So next week it's going to be Manasa and herbs. Is it going to be the same time? I believe so. It should come out on Google Calendar. Monica has been scheduling those, and you should get something from her. All right. Well, I'm going to stop recording.